Welcome back. I'm Dr. Bob Cargill, the excavator, and welcome to the Tower of Bible podcast. We have with us today, freshly returned from Israel, Jordan Jones. Jordan, welcome back.
Happy to be back.
Hey, tell us about your trip. You had a long trip, first of all, and you weren't just in Israel, were you?
No, so I spent 3 weeks in Athens before going to Israel, seeing the sites there, traveling around Athens, hitting all of the classical sites, and then made my way to Israel, where I spent 2 weeks in the Old City, capturing the sights and the sounds of the Old City, a lot of which viewers can go see in our Dig Bible shorts that are available on our YouTube channel, before making my way up into the north of Israel, where I participated in an excavation at Abel Beit Ma'akah for 3 weeks. So a busy 8-week stint around, but hard to complain when you're traveling and seeing all of those sites in that part of the world.
Yeah, and I'm guessing you had some decent food while you're over there as well, huh?
Oh, delicious food. Delicious shawarma and falafel and hummus. Pita. It's just not the same. It's just not the same.
And the coffee is what
Strong.
I always enjoy when I'm over there. So you were with Athens. Now this was a University of Iowa group that you were with going over there. Tell us, how did the students enjoy? Many of them have not been out of the state of Iowa, but haven't been out of the country. This is their first trip to Athens, first trip to Greece. What was their experience?
Yeah, this is a lot of the students' first international travel, or as you said, first time out of Iowa. So it's a real eye opener for some. But Athens is a great place to have that first trip because there is so much packed into that city. The city is, it's a large city, it's a busy city, but you're just walking down the street, and much like in the old city, within Athens, there's monuments and historic buildings around every corner.
Right.
So it's a real experience for students to get to travel through, and you're walking, and right next to the coffee shop that you leave is a Koryagik monument. And so you have these things, the old and the modern, just smashed together in Athens, which is a unique experience.
And what would you say was the highlight of this? I mean, I'm guessing the Acropolis. What was?
I think for a lot of them, the Acropolis Museum, we do one day after the other. So you go to the Acropolis first, go up and you see through, and it's a very busy site. Mm-hmm. And if you're keeping track of the news, there's new plans rolling forward about how they're going to allow people to come in because it's gotten overcrowded.
Right.
In a good way. Everybody wants to go and everybody wants to experience this, but in order to preserve it, they're going to have to implement some new measures about how many people are going in. And that's a wonderful site. But then following that up, I think with the Acropolis Museum is a really interesting way to bookend those things. The Acropolis Museum is just right down the hill. It's a beautiful museum.
Right.
And it really frames a lot of the things in a unique way because you're right down the hill. You look up out of the windows and you can see the Acropolis sitting right there as you're looking at these items that came from the Acropolis.
That's awesome. What is the status of the Elgin marbles? We always talk about this. I know that they've made space for their return. I know there's a lot of pressure on the British Museum to get these returned. Is there any talk about this, or at least in Athens?
In Athens, there's always talk. I spent some time with a reporter there in Athens, actually. We bumped into each other getting coffee, and in the happenstance of waiting for coffee, I found out she was a reporter. She found out I was a graduate student in classics, and the conversation naturally made its way to the Elgin marbles. And in that conversation, she was sharing some of, the hopes that they have of them coming back, but also a little bit of the reality, knowing if they were to come back, a lot of them expect there needs to be some kind of trade.
Right.
They know the British Museum, they're not just going to send them back for nothing. They're going to want something in the back and forth. Now, the museum has designed its layout for those marbles with gaps. Yeah. So in the hopes that they return, they can naturally fit in.
Right.
There's a little bit of hope around some of this other pressure with the Vatican returning its fragments and some other countries returning the smaller fragments that they have. But a lot of those, it's also a little bit different. With the Vatican, for example, they returned the items to the Patriarch of the Greek Orthodox Church. They didn't actually give them back to Greece. And then it was the Patriarch that gave it back. So, there's the little political ways around. Right. There's hope. There's a desire. But nobody's waiting with bated breath for the Elgin marbles to return tomorrow.
So for those of you who aren't aware, the state of Greece has actually built their new museum right next to the Acropolis. And so the layout is similar to the Parthenon, and you can actually walk around and see the area that they've built inside the museum for where the marbles will go when they are returned. It's a very anticipatory museum, right?
Yes.
And then you'll be able to look at the marbles and then look out and see where they went in the museum. They're not going to put them back on the actual structure, but they've built this museum so that you can see them as they might have been, thousands of years ago. But they built this structure prior to getting the marbles. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy here. It's a great idea. I would like to see those marbles returned to Greece. I think it would really help both nations. I really think it would be a very good precedent for the United Kingdom to set, and I think it would really help the nation of Greece in their tourism. Well, I'm glad you got to do that. Did you go anywhere outside of Athens?
We did a little bit going down, visiting some islands, but the majority of this trip's focus was the city of Athens.
Good.
So it was in depth within the complexity of Athens and really just diving deep into what's within that city.
Excellent. And then you got on a plane and you went over to Jerusalem because 3 weeks in Athens isn't enough. You need to now go on an archaeological dig. And you went to Abel Beit Ma'akah, but before you did that, you had some time. You got to stay in the old city.
Yep.
And
stayed in the old city just inside the Jaffa Gate.
Yeah.
And 2 weeks, all day, all night, running around the old city, hitting all of the sites that if you were to visit, what's the things you need to try to fit in? Now, I might have done a little bit more than you may want to do in your day to day, but my hope was, run around and we're filming shorts there to introduce viewers to what are some of these sites within the old city, inside the confines of the walls, that you can see if you're visiting Israel and you don't have enough time to go through the whole country.
That's right.
There's so much within the old city that you can see, so much history, that just a couple days there's a lot that's waiting for you.
That's right. And these shorts that you were taking have gotten a lot of views here on the channel. Tell us a little bit about the Dig Bible and what you were doing with this. The idea is to try to take very deliberately short snapshots of all of these sites to just give a taste to people who might not know what some of these things are?
Yeah, it's a quick introduction. So within the YouTube short format, everything's under a minute. So you're not having to commit yourself to an hour-long view here. But within that minute, giving you the sights, the sounds, and a little bit of the history of some of these locations. And inside that Dig Bible, we're doing some things that's terminology of dig. What are we doing on a site? But also wanting to showcase some of these locations, some of the history of these sites that's connected with, in a lot of cases, archaeological excavation. So what are some of those things that have come forward? So if you're interested in learning more about the archaeology of Israel, the Dig Bible is something you can turn to for quick introductions to famous finds like the Dead Sea Scrolls, or some of the famous sites that you might see if you were to go there. So it's a little bit for everybody. There's something different here, and hopefully something that viewers can find informative and helpful.
And then you went up to Abel Beit Ma'akah and you had a wonderful excavation up there. It's a fascinating site. It's a wonderful team. It's a well-run excavation. But you were also able to take some shorts there to put some actual visuals to archaeological terms and methods, correct?
Yeah, so I participated there at that dig for 3 weeks. And something we wanted to do there is some of those terminology pieces that we've done in the Dig Bible, like what is a locus or what is a bulk? If you've never been on a site before, the definition is something you can have in your mind, but seeing it is so different, especially when you're excavating within a square. If you get this term just written down or read to you of what is a locus, and it's this thing within three-dimensional space that we use to separate stuff, it's so abstract. And so being able to see that within a square and see how these things can run right up next to each other and the importance of these terms, it's something that's different being able to do it there. So in the midst of digging during breakfast, run back up to a square and filming something there so that you can kind of get a taste of what this is like. And maybe it interests some people in participating in a dig in the future.
That's right. And of course, here at Bible and Archaeology, we're always trying to encourage people not only to learn about the archaeology of ancient Israel, but also to participate to the greatest extent possible, whether that's actually volunteering to go over on a dig or whether it's trying to learn as much credible information about good science, good archaeology going on there. You were on one of these excavations. Tell us about the ABM dig. What in 1 minute and 60 seconds, what were you digging? What's going on there? What's the purpose of the dig? What'd you do this year?
Yeah, so ABM, it's an excavation up in the very north of Israel. It's in the Hula Valley, in the tip. From our site, you can look out and you can see a village, Metula, in Lebanon. So we're up in the north, and we're about 5 kilometers from Dan. And this is a site where they're looking to find more information about this location, which is mentioned in the Bible, and get an idea of the identity of the persons who lived at this site, especially through the different phases. They've got multiple phases. They have Bronze Age, Iron Age, and forward. So they're trying to get a sense of what's happening at the site and who might have lived at this site. I was excavating in Area A. Area A is one of their larger areas on the site where they've had a lot of cultic finds that have come out from multiple phases of excavation. So something that aligns with what we get with Sheba's rebellion and the wise woman of ABM. And, people used to go to Abel and inquire is what she says. And the archaeology seems to be giving some credence to that. Now, they're not totally sure what that means just yet, but there is what seems to be a lot of cultic activity happening in this area. And so they're very interested to keep excavating there because there's a continuity of practice in this area that definitely seems to suggest the text is on to something in its remembrance of what might have happened here.
Yeah, because the Bible talks about Abel as a place where people would go to do not necessarily cultic things, but at least it had a reputation as a place where you went to inquire of sorcerers, prophets, wisdom, but it was a place that had a reputation for where you would go to seek answers that you couldn't otherwise get, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. And this is in 2 Samuel, the wise woman in replying to Joab in 2 Samuel 20, if we start it right, verse 16, verse 17, Joab comes near and she says, "Listen to the words of your servant. They used to say in the old days, let them inquire at Abel, and so they would settle a matter. I am one of those who are peaceable and faithful in Israel. You seek to destroy a city that is a mother in Israel. Why will you swallow up the heritage of the Lord?" So there is some sort of dispute here with the readings of the text of what does this inquiry look like. In the Septuagint reading of this passage, it mentions Dan as well, that inquiry happened at Abel and Dan.
Right.
And, as nearby sites, Dan surpasses Abel in its history here. Mm-hmm. But there's some sort of inclination that things are happening.
Right.
Something that supports this archaeologically is the find of over 400 astragale bones, which are these animal knuckle bones.
Sure.
That are often used sometimes in playing games as dice, but also in divination.
That's
you
right.
roll the knuckle bones, and that can give you a reading. So that may support maybe some of this inquiry, or it could be a different practice altogether, and this just happens to line up with that. But there is a history here in the text that's saying this is a place where people came to ask questions.
Yeah, and this region, this northern, and again, we'll put it on a map here, but this region from Abel to Dan, and of course I dug over at Banias, just over the line there in the Golan early on in my career. And it's all kind of associated with, Pan. Banias is named after the god Pan, the Greek god Pan. And it's, the things that happen in the caves, in the shadows, there's this mystic tradition. There's a story about Jesus in the Bible, casting a demon out of what we would call an epileptic, right? It was somebody who was having they thought he was demon possessed, and it was a place that was known for possession. It was a place that was known for these mystical things that were going on between Banias and Dan because of the lush greenery. This is one of the most beautiful parts of Israel. If you haven't been there, those viewers who have been up to Tel Dan can affirm this. It's just you walk around in these beautiful bubbling river, and this is the headwaters of the Jordan River. All of this water feeds into the Jordan. So these are the kinds of places that kind of lend themselves to being places that you might go to seek answers. That or deep into the desert, right? But I'm glad you got to spend time up there. It's a wonderful dig. It's run by some wonderful scholars. who know what they're doing, who do good
Yes.
archaeology, and who follow good archaeological method, please tell us, what is the difference between, and why is it so important to follow good scientific archaeological method on a licensed excavation, as opposed to, just for an example, going around in the dump pile and picking out things that have been lying around for 40 years and then making absurd claims about things you think you see with your imagination. I'm not picking on anybody in particular.
Yeah, no, not at all. I think for a lot of people, when you read these stories, in one way, there's I think some obvious sense for when you learn about the practices of how things need to be recorded. The field notes that need to happen every day. Things are connected with squares. And then within the square with the pottery buckets connected to the locus that things came from, because you need to be able to put every find back into its three-dimensional space.
Right.
We can't put stuff back in the ground, but we can reconstruct its context through the notes. Ideally, a dig should be practiced in such a way that you can go back through the paperwork, find the object, find where it came from, the day, and get all of that information back together. In contrast to, like you mentioned, maybe sifting through a dump pile. Our dump pile, well, we had two dump piles in Area A. One of them was located right next to what one of the dig directors called the Twin Temples, the porta potties. And so the porta potties are there. Right next to it is the dump pile, and it runs down the hill.
Yeah.
If you wanted to, you could go over and dig through.
Yeah.
And you might find maybe a piece of trash that fell out of somebody's pocket when they were walking to the bathroom in the morning. And hey, I'm sifting through this dump pile and I found a Nature Valley bar wrapper. Right. Does that mean that someone in the context of Iron 2A was eating a Nature Valley bar? No, it means somebody dropped this. It got put into a bucket, dumped into the dump, covered up in dirt. And as we're sifting through, we don't know where that came from.
That's right.
So the difference in that, it's very stark when you're practicing. When you're there on the dig, the reality of it is very clear of what happens one way versus another and how those things can be connected.
Yeah.
Another way that's as simple too is when you wash pottery every day. In the end of the day, we're washing pottery. The pottery needs to soak overnight. You wash off the dirt so it can be read and identified. But if the tag gets lost, or if pottery falls out of the bag or onto the ground, a good dig says, unfortunately, this is lost. We can't be sure where this came from. We can't be sure that this wasn't lying on the ground. Those things need to be securely connected with where they came from.
Right.
And so I think a real reason for everyone who is able to, because it is a financial as well as a physical hardship sometimes to go and participate in a dig. But if you are able and you're interested in this, I think that participating is a great way to open everyone's eyes to the real complexities and the importance of detailed scientific record-keeping licensed digs, because they're not the same as everything else.
Yeah, it's I couldn't say it better. One of the other things is, when you're dealing with different areas, when you're dealing from different squares and they're at different time periods, different levels in time, and everybody's dumping into the same dump pile, and then you pull out a whatever from the dump pile, especially if it's been there for a long time, you have no way of knowing how old that thing that you pulled out of there is. And you might say, well, this is, based on, but the context is lost. And this is one of the problems with, doing these sifting digs. Now, if you can date it based on paleography or based on something else, you can make a case that this should date to it, but you have lost all the definite context. And then if you're using your imagination and you can't actually show people what something says, this is the problem. So it's important to do good methodology. I'm glad you got to participate in a good quality excavation. I'm hoping that you get to go back there and do this again. Is there anything else you want to tell us before we need to head out and encourage people to go visit digbible.com and check out Jordan's adventures through the Holy Land? He was over in Athens. He was down in Jerusalem. He was up at Abel, and we'll continue to put out these shorts on a daily basis. And again, it's not just for holy sites and famous sites, but it's also for archaeological terms and methodology. If there's a term that maybe, what does that actually mean? Or how does that actually work? You can go to digbible.com and you can actually find a short. You can also go to the Bible and Archaeology website, and we will have we're about ready to launch this, a list of terms that will have these videos associated with them. So it's like a glossary. You can look at the term and then you can watch a corresponding video with them. Anything else you want to tell us, Jordan?
I'd say as viewers watch through those Dig Bible shorts, if there's something that we haven't covered yet that you're interested in learning more about, a term or a site or a find, leave it in the comments for us so we can know what other things you might be interested in, because I mean, it's kind of limitless with the terminology and the finds of where we could go. So if you have an interest that we haven't touched yet, be sure to let us know.
Jordan, thanks for your time and giving us an update on what sounds like an exciting summer. I'm glad you're home safely. I want to spend a quick moment to give a shout out to all of my colleagues in Israel who are participating in the protests. Aaron Mayer and all of my colleagues, Shua Kiselevitz, and all of you who are trying to uphold a democratic and liberal Israel. Voting is important. An independent court is important. And we really appreciate what you're doing to try to maintain a democratic and independent Israel. Good on you. Please keep that up. I think our country could take a good lesson from what you're doing to try to stave off this politicization of the courts. But anyways, I just wanted to throw that out there because Israel's having a lot of turmoil right now politically. But Jordan, welcome back. It's good to see you. And from all of us here at Bible and Archaeology and the Tower of Bible podcast, we're wishing you everything the best.